This video tells the story of a backpacking trip from the headwater lake of the North Fork of the Koyukuk down through the gates of the Arctic. A trip that 10 of us made, and all of us felt it was the hardest backpack we'd ever done. Before we get into the trip, I've got a few overall comments. We did the trip a few years ago in 2015 August, and it was my 5th trip to Gates of the Arctic National Park, which for me is the best wilderness for backpacking anyway in the world. The park is true wilderness, incredibly remote and scenic, with no roads, trails, cell connections, or buildings, except maybe an occasional Indian shack. And for that matter, we didn't see a single person the whole time we were there. And we were doing a route that a few other people had done. It's a huge park, the second largest in the park system, and about the size as all of East Tennessee, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Tri-Cities, where all of us were from. It's located in the Brooks Range, which is a range of mountains that runs across the northern part of Alaska, and the park is kind of in the middle of that Brooks Range. Our route started with a float plane landing on a headwater lake for the North Fork of the Koyukuk River, and then we descended down the Koyukuk River through the Gates of the Arctic, which is formed by two large mountains on both sides of the river that kind of make it look like a gate that you can see into the Arctic from, and then to a gravel bar pickup down below the gates of ways. We were in far north Alaska, Gates of the Arctic National Park, as shown on these two maps. Getting there wasn't easy. We flew different routes to Fairbanks, gathered at this hotel. Here's a picture of our group at the hotel. There were 10 of us, and here are individual pictures. All experienced backpackers. Most of us had been to Alaska, and all of us were from the Knoxville, Tennessee area. From Fairbanks, we flew a commuter airlines to Bettles, crossing over the Yukon River, and here going over the Alaska pipeline. Bettles is a truly isolated town, population somewhere around 12, no road connections, very remote. That's Brooks Range Aviation who did the flying for us. And this is the National Park headquarters for Gates of the Arctic National Park. And here we had to attend a safety talk. Have you had examples of bears actually bothering people much here?
Not so much. It's, for the most part, the stories I hear is people will be walking through thick brush and they'll be talking, and then they might just see a bear's head pop up, but then they be big, they make themselves known, and that bear usually runs.
As long as they don't have cubs, right?
Yeah, as long as they don't have cubs.
Yeah, I've never seen a bear here except it was running the other way.
Yeah, I've been in the park about 30 days total this summer, and I've seen 2 black bears, which I was on the river for, and 1 grizzly, which I was also on the river for, and that was just outside of the park. So, I mean, they're out there, but when you have 8.5 million acres, then the bears are pretty wide distributed. Yeah.
From Bettles, we rode out to a small lake and caught our bush flight on this de Havilland otter that dates back to before 1968. And here's a still photograph of our group on the plane ready to go. As always, the scenery was incredible as we flew in with fall colors. Here we're flying through the Gates of the Arctic, Frigid Crags on the left, Boreal Mountain on the right, the Arctic beyond. And then a picture of the gravel bar that we're supposed to be hiking to be picked up later on. Summit Lake we're flying over, where we're going to be starting. And finally, we're flying in to land on Summit Lake. It's well into the afternoon when we get there, and so we only hike about 1.5 miles heading down the valley. Joan finds and shows off some caribou horns. Here's our first camp on the open tundra, and also our cook tent separate. That was the back side facing into the wind, and here's the front side where we're sitting and eating. You might wonder what the two guys are looking at, and the next photograph shows a caribou all by itself for some reason. Here's the view of the sun just hitting the mountaintops on the morning of day 2, and a map showing us continuing along the North Fork and dropping down and around a 1,000-foot gorge. We first head across the huge open tundra, sometimes crossing creeks, heading down the valley of the Koyukuk. It was a cloudy day, which would prove to be the norm, along with rain, snow, sleet, cold, and wind. Here Joan is looking at some Dall sheep way up on the mountainside. Here we are at the crux of the hiking for this day for sure. And you can see the incredible drop, about 1,000 feet, very steep, and there wasn't an obvious way to go down. We looked all over and finally came up with this very steep drop that we managed to make our way down and finally got down to the bottom. A short while ago, we were up on top of that high ridge, the puddle, trying to find a way down to the river below. There. North Fork of the Koyukuk. Going down the valley. Here's our tents, gravel walk campsite. And Joan and I finally found a route which came from up there, traversed out, around, back and forth, and then came down that scree and brush and grassy area to the junction with the North Fork of the Koyukuk up there somewhere. And now we're getting ready to have dinner, well deserved. Here we are cooking dinner after the second day. Day 3 was another tough day as we continued down the valley. As is always the case in Gates of the Arctic, there are no trails, and we had to find our route along a really rocky shore as shown in these photos. After we got out of the gorge, we were able to move up onto the bench above with the tundra, and it was particularly beautiful with the reddish blueberry leaves and some other yellow color here and there. It was already fall up there. Again, we camped on a gravel bar, which was the only really level and kind of dry place around, and here we're eating. After breaking, day 4 was our hardest day, crossing an unnamed creek, and we only did about 3 miles. We'd been doing about 5 miles a day. Early on day 4, I'm here talking on our satellite phone with Brooks Range Aviation to let them know how we're doing. We had a terribly hard crossing later on, but started out with some pretty easy crossings like these, really cold water, but not very dangerous. And on down a way, we saw a wolf footprint. And here we are at the crux of the entire trip. An unnamed creek that runs into the North Fork of the Koyukuk, just a few feet away. And Bob is here trying to cross, but he couldn't. So using prior experience, we decided to link arms in groups of 5 and to kind of shuffle across. And the photos that follow basically trace the first group of 5 as they went across and made it. Basically, you put the 2 strongest hikers on both ends, and everybody supports everybody, and you kind of shuffle across, facing upstream and leaning forward. And as mentioned, it worked, and You can see the joy in these people's faces as they got across. Steve, Barbara, Joan, Bob, and BJ were in the first group. That left myself, John, Beverly, Tommy, and Jackie to give it a try in the second group. After the crossing, we were pretty wiped out and decided to camp right on the other side of the creek for the night, which ends day 4.